Today on Better Book Clubs, 4 luxurious novels of the aughts. Quiet has become a bit of a backhanded compliment when it comes to novels. Quiet novels take their time telling their stories. They can immerse you in an unfamiliar world so completely that it becomes familiar to you. They can introduce you to characters who you feel like you've gotten to know even better than some real people you know. I actually prefer the term luxurious, and that's the term I'm using in this video today, because these quiet, luxurious novels really are a luxury. It takes a luxury of time to read them and to really become immersed in them. They're not the kinds of novels that you want to read for 10 minutes before bed every night. They're the kinds of novels that you really want to slow down and savor and curl up with for hours at a time. These luxurious novels are not boring. The topics and the conflicts are centered around something very tense, but they take their time unfolding, which in a way can actually increase the tension of the reader in a really pleasurable way. So today I want to share with you 4 of my favorite luxurious novels of the 2000s. These are all novels that did very well at the time they came out, and some of them you've probably heard of before, but I think they're a great representation of the kinds of books that are less likely to get published today, 20-some years later. So books that I think you and your book club would enjoy, that are luxuries to read. My first pick is Charles Baxter's novel, The Feast of Love, published in 2000. Charles Baxter is one of our great short story writers living and working today, but this is definitely a novel, and yet each chapter reads a little bit like a separate short story, and it takes a while to figure out how everything is going to come together. All of the stories center around a man named Bradley, who also happens to have a dog named Bradley, and Bradley is the neighbor of a character named Charles Baxter. So the novel starts out with this kind of postmodern premise. We almost feel as if the author is telling us about his own friends and neighbors. The Feast of Love turns out to be a deep meditation on love in many different forms. Romantic love, both old relationships and new relationships, but also the love of friendships, the love of a parent for a child, the love of neighbors, the love of a man for his dog. So there are all kinds of different examinations of love in these stories. They're really beautiful, slow stories that kind of orbit around this one protagonist, even though he's not the main character in most of the stories. And the novel ends up really being a feast. So it's one of those books that you have to slow down and savor. It's not fast food, it's a slow, luxurious meal. Zadie Smith's debut novel, White Teeth, was also published in 2000, the same year as The Feast of Love. And this novel I read pretty much at the time that it came out, but the first chapter of it still really sticks in my mind because it's so vividly written. And in fact, that first chapter is just a taste of what's to come later in the novel. The whole novel is a long and luxurious story about a pair of friends, World War II vets in London. It's an intercultural, intergenerational friendship story, but it starts with a really compelling, memorable scene in which one of the men is depressed and he's decided he's going to end his own life. And he's inside his car attempting to asphyxiate himself when a halal butcher, his son, sees what's going on and he runs over to save him. The whole chapter very slowly unfolds in such a beautiful way. It just really takes its time to tell this story. The British newspaper The Guardian described White Teeth this way when it first came out. It's an epic serio-comic saga following the fortunes of 2 families from Bangladesh and Jamaica who have fetched up in the melting pot that is Williston. So White Teeth by Zadie Smith is another example of a great, luxurious novel from the 2000s. My third recommendation comes from another British author, Ian McEwan, whose novel Atonement was published in 2001. This is one of my favorite novels, and in fact, I'm planning to do another video on it in more detail because it's on my top 10 novels list. Atonement tells the story of a child misunderstanding a situation and a lie that follows, and how that seemingly small thing destroys the lives of a number of people. And the whole suspense of the novel is really just about wondering, how is this ever going to work out or turn out? What's going to happen as a consequence of this terrible thing that this child has done? I think my favorite thing about this novel is that McEwan does something really bold. He spends the entire first half of the novel building a world around a country manor. The whole first half of the book takes place pretty much on a single day in which this incident that I just mentioned occurs. And you really get to know these different characters, and you really feel as if you're there at this country manor, having dinner with this family, watching the entire episode unfold in real time. What McEwan does then that's really bold is that when you get to the middle of the novel, suddenly everything shifts. Suddenly you're in a different time and a different place and a completely different world. He has to build a world all over again. And what's amazing is that he succeeds at that. So the second half of the novel takes place during a World War II battle. At first, it's not clear how that's connected to the first half of the story, and yet within a few pages, he's drawn you in again. So that's one of the things that I love about this novel, but also that takes some patience and it takes some investment on the part of the reader to agree to allow McEwan to draw you in yet again in the second half of the novel. Atonement is a really psychological novel, but it's very different psychologically than the kinds of psychological thrillers that have been published in the last 10 or 15 years. And again, it's one of those books that's more of a luxury to read. It takes some attention and some slowing down in order to really appreciate it. My final pick for luxurious novels of the aughts is Marilynne Robinson's novel Gilead, which was published in 2004 and subsequently won the Pulitzer Prize. This book is the quietest of the quiet. The whole novel is really taking place inside the mind of a country preacher who is both looking back on his past and also thinking about his legacy for his young son. The scandalous thing that's happened in this book is that the minister has married a woman who's younger than he is and who people just think is completely wrong for him. And yet we come to understand something about their relationship over the course of this novel and his love for his son. It's just a beautiful, very interior, very quiet, luxurious read. Probably the best way to describe Gilead would be to say that it's about small days leading up to big questions. So if you're interested in thinking about some of those big questions of life, this is a great novel for you. My cousin, when she read it, said, I think you have to be in an emotionally quiet place in order to really fully appreciate this novel. And I think that's a great way of putting it. There's a place for cliffhangers and fast-paced plotting, but there's also still a place for these luxurious novels. And unfortunately, publishers aren't picking them up as often. So it's harder for us to find them today, which is why I've gone back to the aughts to look for some great examples of these kinds of reads. They take a little bit more time and quiet and introspection in order to appreciate, but these luxurious novels are exactly the kind of read we need sometimes, and I hope we'll get some more of them. I'd love to hear about what some of your favorite luxurious reads are in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, and I'll be back soon with another episode of Better Book Clubs.